So, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. And I am delighted to be joined today by David Guttman. And David is a 3x Inc. 500 entrepreneur with multiple 8 and 9-figure business exits. He's got a massively deep commitment to helping others achieve success without sacrificing integrity, relationships, or well-being. He's also the host of the David Guttman podcast, where he speaks with top industry leaders to explore the intersection of wealth, purpose, and ethical leadership. So I really wanted to bring David onto the podcast because he is such an advocate of servant leadership in particular, but also how we can live life to the full and how, as leaders, we can get the best out of our team. So, David, welcome to Impactful Teamwork, and I am super happy to have you here today.
Julia, thanks for having me on.
Oh, you are so welcome. So thank you. So just before we came on air, you were telling me about your TED talk and how successful that's been. So let's just give the listeners a little bit of a heads up on what they can find out on your TED talk, because it's about this topic of servant leadership.
Yeah, when I was 24 years old, I was misdiagnosed with terminal cancer by three different doctors and given 6 months to live. I had just found out I was accepted into Wharton Business School, and they told me that I would be dead before I enrolled in the fall.
Oh my
Mm.
God.
And the wake up call for me was at this point, I was 24. I'd gone to an Ivy League school for undergrad, got a computer science degree from Brown. Then I'd been Division I college wrestler there. Company I worked for had IPO'd. I was worth $300,000 on paper. And I just found out I got into Wharton. And then I also found out I'm going to be dead. And I'm like, what was all that for? All that hard work for nothing. So I reevaluated my life at that point. I wasn't a bad guy, but I was almost maniacally focused on my personal and professional development and had very clear idea that I wanted to accomplish certain things by a certain age. And if I didn't, I
Yeah.
was a failure. I was super like driven to the point I don't know if I'd even be friends with the 24-year-old version of me. In fact, if you'd asked me at 24 if I was happy, I wouldn't have understood the question. I'd be like, what is this happiness you speak of? It just pivoted me to be much more externally focused. And I think that's what kind of turned me into a servant leader. What I realized was I decided I was going to let my success be the side effect instead of the goal. And man, it just really improved. Ironically, actually, I think the success I'd been chasing came to me faster than it would have if I'd been more internally focused. And I think the thing that again, blessing in disguise for sure was people think that when you're CEO or top leader in an C-level executive in an organization that you're a fiduciary, and so therefore your responsibility is to the company first and maybe your coworkers second. I would argue it's the reverse. I think that if you put your employees, I don't like to call them employees, like rather call them coworkers. If you put your
Yeah.
coworkers first, they will take care of your customers, they'll take care of your investors. And so once I made that pivot, one, the success I think I was chasing came faster, and it also was a lot more pleasant way to travel through life.
Yeah. And I love that you don't call them employees, because I just hate that word. It's just such a you employ somebody to use them. The whole energy around that word is just completely wrong. So I call them team members, co-workers. I love that. So what do you think the biggest lesson that leaders can take away is when we start focusing on our people? What are the benefits that are coming from that? You slightly alluded to them already, but perhaps you can just expand on those for us.
Think about it, right? We've all, and unless you're like super young, we've all at some point probably worked for a leader that we knew genuinely cared about us as a person, right? And we've also probably worked for that person, more common, unfortunately, that could care less about us as a person. And which of those two people got your best? It's not even close, right? And even if you have someone who's self-motivated and driven and so forth, might get good work from them, but you'll get the best work from someone who knows you really deeply care about them. And that's not the kind of thing you can fake. And so I think that what leaders miss is that you, as a servant leader, just like the word says, you serve the people
Mm,
that you lead. It's not the other way around. Leadership is a privilege.
yeah.
And people obviously conflate management and leadership. They're completely different things. I've met people that are pretty good leaders, but not good managers. And I've met some people that are effective managers, effective, not necessarily great, effective managers, but not great leaders. It's that person who can do both. And I think one of the challenges people have is a lot of the role models that are out there. You look at someone like a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk, these are people who are among the most successful. Elon Musk is the most successful entrepreneur of all time,
Yeah.
but he's not a good guy. He's not. I know someone who worked for him for over 10 years, and These are people that are successful in spite of their poor leadership style, not because of it. And I think because that's held up as, oh, look at how great these people are and how successful they are. The reality is just because you can be successful and have a miserable journey through life. And I would argue that servant leadership is the best path to be successful for those mere mortals, people that are not as talented as an Elon or a Steve Jobs that want to be successful. I think servant leadership is far and away the best, most effective strategy. And it also happens to be the one that's the most pleasant.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the most rewarding, right? But at the end of the day, when our team members come to work engaged and happy, I often talk about this ripple effect. And I think that as leaders, we've got an obligation that our team members go home from work and they've had a good experience at work. So they go home and they're happy. So now they're nicer to their spouse and their kids. And now we create this positive ripple effect versus they go home and they're like, I had a really rubbish day at work. And now they scream at their wife and their kids. And we create this negative ripple effect throughout the world. So actually, there's a lot of responsibility on leaders to lead well, right? And to encourage that. And of course, as all the stats show, when you were starting sharing, we've all worked for somebody and we've all worked for that manager that's just or that leader who's not great. And 70% of people are leaving bad managers, bad leaders, rather than the company. So I think it's so important. But I'd just like to explore a bit more this power of relationships and the authenticity you were talking about there, because I think that we're living in a world now, and I don't think anyone would dispute this, that is crazy busy. There's so much to happen, so much uncertainty. And it feels like spending time getting to know your team members and your co-workers is a little bit self-indulgent. And we don't have the time for that. And I think we could probably both agree, right, that absolutely it's exactly the opposite.
I think there's a few things, right? I always tell leaders that if you're not at least 30% therapist, you're not doing your job right.
I love that. Love that.
And people are, but I'm the boss. Why should I have to be someone's, emotional support animal? And I'm like, because that's what good leaders do. And at the end of the day, I've had people think about sometimes think about leadership or what they're doing professionally in a siloed way. Because of my leadership style, I've had people work for me at 5, 6 different companies because they're like, that's the guy I want to work for. And not only that, but people that I've hired that are servant leaders. One of the guys I hired, he was relatively young, like mid 20s, and when I hired him, he brought on, I think we hired another 6 or 7 people from his professional network. And he had the same experience that I did, which is he would just have to tell them, hey, I have this new opportunity. And they're immediately quitting whatever their current job is and they're coming to work for him. They're
Wow.
like, hey, if Alex is telling me this is a good opportunity, it's a good opportunity. If Alex is telling me this is the good guy to work for, this is the good guy to work for. Because Alex said it, that's all I need to hear. And I have people that are like that in my network too. It's when you treat people properly, most people respond in kind. I will say the one thing about servant leadership, though, for people who do want to be servant leaders that they get wrong is this does require you to hire in a particular way and to fire in a particular way. Because if you hire the wrong people and you have this leadership style, it's not going to work very well. And so that means you have to be really thoughtful about the hiring process. And when you get it wrong, and I don't care how experienced you are, I've probably hired and fired over 1,000 people in my career. I get it wrong sometimes still. And when you get it wrong, you need to rip the band-aid off immediately because one great hire can have huge positive ripple effects in the business, but so can a negative one in the other direction.
Yeah, and I totally have done the latter, not got rid of somebody who was a bad apple. And we've all done it. Logically, they had an amazing CV and they had exactly the skills I needed. But my intuition in the recruitment process was I'm not quite sure they're a cultural fit. And it was an absolute unmitigated disaster. But I kept trying to make it work. It's partly my own ego, right? I didn't want to admit I messed up. And it actually took my team turning around and saying, Julia, if you don't get rid of this person, we're all leaving. And that's quite a humbling place to be, right? But
It,
it's,
yeah, it goes back to the firing fast, right? And
yeah,
not only that, because the person who's that wrong cultural fit, and that's what I was saying, like I've learned a lesson myself. One of the things that I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't realize I would later in my career was the two most important qualities to hire for by galaxies, the two most important qualities are humility and curiosity.
yeah,
If someone doesn't have those two qualities, I don't care how capable they are. I'm not hiring them. And the problem, just like you said, is correct. It's the ego of you become emotionally invested in that hiring decision
Mm.
having been the right one.
Yeah.
And with the best of intentions, you're trying to give that person a second chance. The part about it that even I'm surprised about is in my 35 plus year career, there's not a single exception, not one of the thousands of people that have worked for me where I've had the idea that maybe I should fire this person and then I didn't, and I didn't regret it. I regret it 100% of the time with zero exceptions. There's not another thing I can tell you that's 100%. Things might
Mm.
be 90%, 95%, but it's 100%. If you have that intuition, it's kind of like the boyfriend or girlfriend. If you think they're cheating on you, they're probably cheating on you.
Yeah. And I think that this is such an important attribute, intuition, that so many leaders, if they're not careful, can disconnect from. And we know that we've got more brain cells in our gut than we have in our head. So it's so important, as servant leadership is about whole leadership, right? It's all about us, the bringing our whole self to work as a leader, and not just your head to work and the logical part of it. It's so important, I think, as leaders, that we think about what's our nervous system, what our body's saying about this. Because, like you said, it's always right, whether we believe it, whether we want to believe it or not, it is always right. Because sometimes in the moment we can rationalize it away. So I know you were telling me you work with a lot of young people, our millennials, Gen Zs. And I'm just curious because you talked about those two attributes for hiring of humility and curiosity. And I'm just really curious, are you finding that those are traits that really exist very strongly in that generation of workers, or something that, because we hear a lot of bad raps about they're not great communicators and all we hear all the negative things. So I'm just really curious about what's your experience of what the value that they're bringing to business.
I think the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, is unbeaten in human history, right?
Yeah.
Everything's a bell curve. I found I'm co-authoring a book about life with an 18-year-old. That's how impressed I
Wow.
am with this 18-year-old, called Life Maxing. And so anyway, so I find it's a mixed bag. I think you find people that are young that are great communicators and great socially, and you find the old people that are too, and everything in between. I think the issue is that the nice thing about the curiosity and the people that are both curious and that are humble is that these are traits that one can choose. I was not always humble, right? That my misdiagnosis made me very humble very quickly. And I didn't even, not only wasn't I humble, I wasn't humble because I didn't value it. It wasn't until I understood its value that I'm like, oh, this is a characteristic that I want to embrace. Curiosity is the same way. And I would argue that everyone starts curious. The kid who's 3 or 4 years old,
Yeah.
why? And you want to strangle them, but that's that curiosity. And I would argue that life and unfortunately our education system tends to beat that curiosity out of
Mm.
them. But the nice thing about it is you can re-engage it at any point. In fact, I would argue AI, when embraced properly, is a great creativity multiplier, a
Mm.
great curiosity multiplier. So I think that I do find it much more prevalent than the younger generation and older generations might think. And I also think that people can choose those characteristics. So I think it's a great thing that the characteristics that are the most important are also ones that are choosable, as opposed to if I just wasn't born with a high enough IQ, maybe it's not in the cards for me. It's not like that. I think most people can be successful by choosing.
Yeah, and I love what you said there about curiosity, because it's absolutely something that gets beaten out of us. Don't keep asking why. I just remember when I was a kid, I was always asking why, and then I was, no, don't ask. So you forget to ask, right? And I think for leaders right now as well, in the time that we're living in, you've got to be curious because we've never been through it before. Nobody knows what's going to happen. It's not like we've been through AI before and we know what's going to happen. None of us know what's going to happen. So we need to keep that mindset of curiosity out there in order that we can embrace what's going on, because otherwise we're just going to get left behind.
But I had years ago, I think I was 23 at the time, so a lot of years ago, took an acting class. I used to do a little bit of
Mm.
acting when I was younger. And it was funny, the guy who was the teacher of the class, he looked like he was homeless. The guy walked in, I'm like, who's this homeless guy? I'm like, oh, he's the instructor. He ended up being one of the best teachers of any kind I have ever met. I remember I was doing this scene. And because when I would do a scene with a character that I could relate to, I would be able to do it pretty well. But if it was a character I couldn't relate to, I
Yeah.
would struggle. And he was trying to explain to me, he said, so he was trying to say it in words I would understand. And he was like, Dave, imagine you have that person who's worked for you for 4 or 5 years and they've always done an amazing job. They're always early, they always work late, they always get their work done, it's always of high quality, and all of a sudden their work starts to fall off. He's like, if when you go to talk to that person, if you're thinking in your head, oh, this person's lazy, they don't care, whatever, and you ask them, hey, I've noticed your work's falling off. Is everything okay? What that person hears is you're lazy, you're working, you know what I'm saying? As opposed to maybe their dog died, maybe their parents ill, there's a good reason for it. Always come from a place, always assume positive intention. And that comes through. You were talking about intuition, right? Intuition is really nothing more than your nervous system's pattern matching abilities, really, when you
Yeah.
think about it. And by leading that way, people respond to you in a very different way. People will be vulnerable and authentic, and you'll be able to help them through whatever they're going through. And when you're able to do that, by the way, when you're able to help someone through a tough situation, that person is going to be so loyal to you. They're really going to care even more because you've demonstrated that you care. And leaders, they give first and they take later, if ever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like good. What's it? Is it Bob Berg? Give us get, right? Reciprocity. I know from my own experience there what you're saying. I was managing a division in Arthur Andersen when we went through the Enron crisis back in 2001, and that was my revelation in that period between being in Arthur Andersen and eventually when we were acquired here in the UK in Deloitte by Deloitte. Of that was my realization that a company wasn't going to look after me. And I'd
Yeah.
always been brought up to believe that. And my dad said, work hard and the company will look after you. And it became very obvious during that point that that wasn't the case. And yeah, so I really had to change my mindset around that and how things showed up in the workplace for me. So I did things differently as a result of that. And I think the lesson I took away from that, to what we're talking about, the positive mindset, was also that I think if things are tough in the business, we need to be really honest with our team members about that. So during that Enron crisis, I tried to protect my team for a long time about what was going on and it'll all be all right. But actually, what I discovered and my big lesson was they were rather I was honest and either say I didn't know or give them the information, even if it was bad. Guys, I'm not sure we've got a bit of a red mark against us that we might all be the division might be made redundant. People would rather have that information and know so they can be empowered to make the choices than not know at all. So actually trying to protect them actually wasn't helpful. And they really wanted that authenticity and vulnerability from me at that time because actually it was empowering for them.
And then ultimately, you can't have a really good relationship, work or otherwise, without trust.
Yeah.
And if people ask you a question and they later find out, you were less than forthcoming with them, they're never going to entirely trust you again. Now, even for me, when I'm in a situation where maybe there's something I literally legally can't share, then I'll say that. I'll be like, look, I really wish I could tell you,
Yeah.
but I'm unable to do so. But I think you could probably draw your own conclusions from the fact that I can't tell you. I might say something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that because again, if you ever want to work with those people again, the fact that and actually you and I, so I started my career at Anderson Consulting, Arthur Anderson,
Oh, did
at
you?
their world headquarters in Chicago.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that place. I came over for some training because for the listeners, Arthur Anderson had a university there, right? In
St.
Chicago.
Charles,
Yeah,
yeah, St.
St.
Charles,
Charles.
yeah, St.
Wow.
Charles, yeah.
White limos in. I thought I'd made it there in my early career.
It was funny. I was my partner, for the part that I worked in, was more forthcoming to me. He told me straight up that he goes, you don't. It's why I was only there for 1 year. He said, you don't count as a person until you're here for 10 years. He literally said it to my face. And I was like, then I don't want to be here. He literally told me to my face. I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
who leads that way? But anyway,
Oh, wow. That's so funny. Oh, small world, isn't it? Small world.
yeah.
But so you've done, Dave, a lot of exits on companies, 8, 9 million, millions, a lot of cash exits. So let's just get a bit to, we've talked a little bit about mindset. Let's just get in a bit of what are some of the practical things that people can do and the challenges that you're coming across as people are looking to scale their business to take it to exit? What are some of the most common challenges that you're finding that leaders come up against in that kind of space?
Believe it or not, and again, I think I've now worked or consulted in over 45 different industries.
Wow.
In fact, I've only been in the same industry twice. I've been in crypto twice, but other than that, it's always been a different industry. Which again, some people see that as a negative. I see it as an advantage, meaning I don't do things the way things have been done. I think
Yeah.
businesses are more the same than they're different. But the thing that's always struck me in every single business, over 95% of businesses that are doing less than 25 million in revenue, which is most businesses, do not have a budget. They don't have a budgeting and forecasting model. It's stunning to me. And again, these are sometimes very sophisticated, well-run companies in many respects, and they don't have a budget, which is just absolutely breathtaking to me. And maybe it's partly because I have such a strong finance background, but in all the consulting work that I did, and whenever I've been leading a company, the very first thing I do is I build a bottoms-up budgeting and forecasting model for two purposes. One, in order to know where you're going, everyone needs to be on the same page. In fact, one of the things I do is I insist that every person that works in a company that I run or that I mentor their CEO, every person in the company needs to be able to read an income statement. It's not that complicated. I could teach anyone
Yeah.
with an IQ over 90 how to read an income statement in 15 minutes. It's just not that complicated. People want to make it act, oh, EBITDA, net income, net operating income. At the high level, the numbers are the numbers, right? And so part of what I do, and I drive my mentees to do, is every company has to have a board of directors, even smaller companies. You have to have quarterly board meetings. You have to have a budget and forecasting model. And then what I do is at the end of, so I prepared probably for over 100 board meetings in my life, in my career. And I'm a very data driven, in the weeds kind of leader. And every single one that I prepared for, I have learned things about this business that I thought I knew the back of my hand that I turns out I didn't know by preparing for that board meeting, because you're having to process the information in a different way because you're having to explain it to people that don't know the business as well as you. And so that exercise itself is useful. But the
Mm.
other thing I do is I make sure that every single employee, whenever it's my decision, every single employee has at least some equity in the business. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build businesses that are going to exit for 9 or 10 figures, right?
Yeah.
That's my goal. And every business that I'm coaching or that I've run, I'm looking for $100 million to $1 billion plus exit. That is my goal. 1% of $1 billion is a lot of money for anybody. And so even if you just set aside 10% of the equity for non-founders, that's enough to motivate most people. And so I do my quarterly board meeting with my board of directors. And then the week after, an all hands company meeting, and I present the same presentation that I gave to the board, I give to the employees. And because I want everybody to understand what we're driving to, what's going better than we thought, what's going worse than we thought, what adjustments we're going to make, because people always sleep better in a bed they make.
Yeah.
And so by being fully transparent with everyone about the good and the bad, that people will always will give you a much better outcome. And not only that, but sometimes they'll come to you with ideas. You'll be surprised how good some of those ideas are that will come from. Or sometimes the other thing people mistake is sometimes really good ideas come from bad ideas. So
Yeah.
the ideating process on its own is a really useful thing. So by doing that, by making sure that everyone understands the financial trajectory of the business, what's going well, what's going badly, that people understand the basic unit economics of the business, and I'm presenting to them. The reason I'm presenting to them in the same way I present to the board of directors is I serve the employees in the same way that I serve my board
Yeah.
of directors and my shareholders. I see them as the same. And by the way, if I made all my employees shareholders, by definition, they are shareholders.
Yeah.
So that's what I find works best. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of these earlier stage
Mm.
companies, oh, we're too small to have board meetings. Oh, we're too small to have a board of directors. I don't want to give people equity. The one thing I remember that one of the crypto companies I worked for, I was unsuccessful. I had equity, but I was unsuccessful in convincing leadership to give equity to everybody else, unfortunately. And I was trying to explain to them, I said, forget about being generous. Even if you were just a selfish jerk, okay? If you set aside 10% of the equity for your employees, I promise you, I'm not pretty sure, I'm not mostly sure, I am certain that 10% will increase the exit value by more than 10%. So even if
Mhm.
you were just a greedy jerk, you'd still do better
Better
by
off.
being generous and giving 10% of the company to everybody.
Yeah, I love that because one of the things I am always talking about is the importance of purpose and everyone knowing where we're heading. And I love that transparency of actually really sharing what the numbers show. Because, like you say, some of our team members have the best ideas. And I just think about one company I do a bit of freelance work for, and I look at all the wastage that happens. But nobody in that company has any idea about what the financials look like. And if only they did, I'm sure there wouldn't be half that wastage because you've got some ownership and skin in the game, right? And you're like, okay, so do I really need that new mobile phone? Does Joe Bloggs need it in my team? Or do I need that extra box of pencils or whatever? People have become more discerning about their decisions.
Okay, now it's not the company's money, it's your money,
Yeah,
right? And
exactly. Yeah.
people spend your money, their own money, and the company's money very differently. That's just
Yeah.
human nature. The other thing people get wrong, and I used to think earlier in my career that this was kind of BS, but as I became more experienced and had more stuff under my belt, I now insist that every company, again, that I run or that I coach has two sets of core values, an internal set of core values and an external set of core values. And the process I use to create those core values is a group exercise. It's not me as the CEO saying, here are our core values, here's what we're going to do. I make it a group exercise where everyone weighs in, there's a vote and so forth. I have the final say if I'm the CEO, but
Sure.
ultimately everyone feels bought into those. I try to make sure that it's four. I don't want to have less, I don't want to have more than four because no one can remember more than four.
Yeah.
And and I use the internal set of core values as the way that everyone agrees as a group. This is how we're going to hire, promote, and reward people within the organization. So
Okay.
if the core values are integrity and work ethic and humility or whatever they are, what I do is I create an award for each of those four core values. As the CEO, the very first time I award them myself to one person for
Mhm.
each of the four. There's usually a small monetary, maybe it's just a few $100s, plus they get a trophy
Yeah.
that they get the humility award or whatever it is. And then from that person's job is at the next quarterly board meeting, they have to award that to somebody else. So for the
Nice.
entire quarter, they're keeping an eye out about who they're going to give this to. You can't give it to your boss. You can't give it to me.
Yeah.
And ideally, you don't give it to someone in your department. You give it to someone in a different department, ideally.
Mhm.
And by doing that, you reinforce those core values. The external core values, that's the filter that we run through when it comes to what our product and our service is going to be, who we're going to partner with, what kind of vendors we're going to work with, things like that. So that runs through this other filter of usually it's another set of four external core values. And I find that again, it's just a great communication tool because it allows everyone to stay on the same page. That plus the financials allows everyone to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction, that we're all owners, acting like owners and behaving like owners.
Yeah. Oh, I love that because this is something I talk about all the time. We need to get everyone pulling in the same direction because so often in businesses, everyone's going different ways. And we wonder why we don't get to where we want to go and why there's so much silo mentality. But just as we start bringing this to a close, there was a topic we were just talking about before we came on air, which was the decision making. And I'm guessing, obviously, the more that your team members are vested financially, they're getting a stake of the business and they understand where it's going, we get better decision making throughout the organization.
For sure, 100%. Yeah, it's like again, it's I always say this about all things in life, whether it's your health. You might have a great doctor. Your doctor's not going to care as much about your health as you do. Okay, they're just not. The lawyer that they're not going to declare care about as much about your lawsuit as you're going to. And so, same thing is when you make someone an owner, all of a sudden now it's not the company's problem, it's our problem. And people get into a much more when they realize that they're it's partly their problem. That means they want to contribute to the solution. It's just human nature.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know about you, but I'm finding at the moment so many CEOs not, what's the word I want to use, not encouraging team members to make decisions or team members because they don't understand how everything joins together and they've not got that transparency we've been talking about. They just want to abdicate making any decisions and they just keep escalating it up and up. And then we've got these bottlenecks where the business can't scale because everything's sitting on the owner's desk or on the board's plate and nothing happens. And so I think we have to really think about how are we creating that right culture to go back to where we started, that people are happy to make those decisions because they feel it's psychologically safe and they're able to do that.
The challenge that you point out is the exact right one, which is it all starts at the top, right? So if
Mm.
you have a leader that is uncomfortable giving people decision making authority, they're going to hire and they're going to promote people that don't make
Mhm.
decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as opposed to, and again, here's the problem. I would argue the same thing. Someone who wants to be a politician probably shouldn't be. Someone who wants to be a police officer probably shouldn't be. Someone who wants to be the boss probably shouldn't be. There's a lot of psychopathy in the C-suite. There unfortunately aren't a lot of people. There just aren't enough servant leaders. And so instead what they do is they lead by maybe something they saw on TV or what they heard about Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or whatever. And I think that's where the issue comes in, is the wrong people are often drawn to those positions. But I
Mm,
actually think that presents an opportunity for people that are not wired that way, that are choosing to be the servant leader, because that person will almost always win over the person that's the dictator.
oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and it's there there are countless examples from my own experience. Again, early in my career, I had a boss who was a terrific leader. And she gave me some feedback early in my career about some shortcomings of mine that just allowed me, and again, because I had enough humility, maybe because of my cancer diagnosis, that I was able to hear those words and integrate them into how I was going to lead moving forward and change the entire trajectory of my career.
And I think that this is so important because leaders have to remember that we're always role modeling what we want everyone else to do. And when I think one of the challenges that I've seen is people work for a leader who's not great, and particularly as they're coming up the ranks, they think that is good leadership, right? So I've got a herd of horses. One of my horses has just progressed to become the leader, but she was learning from not a very good leader, right? So her frame of reference was what she knew. And it wasn't very good. So she's not very skilled at that. And I see that happening a lot in business where people are replicating what they see their boss doing. But if their boss isn't very good, then we get a problem. So there's a real onus. And that's why I'm so delighted you've done your TED talk and it's doing so well, because we've got an awareness gap here of how do we help leaders understand there's a better way and a different way of doing things, and you don't have to follow the kind of dictatorial model that unfortunately still exists, that maybe worked in the industrial era and other eras but just isn't fit for purpose for business today.
When people mistakenly think that if by being a servant leader that you're a pushover, right? And it's just not
No.
true. I expect I am accountable for everything that I do, and I hold everyone that works for me accountable for what they do. With that being said, as the leader, I try to deflect as much credit as I possibly can, and I try to
Yeah.
absorb as much blame as I possibly can. Because ultimately, if I am the final decision maker, every failure is my fault. Maybe I hired wrong, maybe I didn't provide the right resources, I didn't provide the right training, the right guidance, the right strategy. If it didn't go well, it is my fault. And if it went well, I didn't execute it myself. I had a team that did.
Yeah.
So it isn't just good leadership, it also happens to be true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I so agree with that. And there's a great cartoon, a Nelson Mandela cartoon that I put in one of my books, which was there was a picture of the group and the leaders are right at the back. And the leader's job is to, what you've said, take the blame when things don't go well and promote the team and not accept the praise when things go well. Said that the wrong way
Yeah, yeah,
around.
no, I
Yeah,
get
you
you.
know what I
Well,
mean.
and again, like I said, you can still hold everyone accountable.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's not a, and the other thing, the other mistake I think people make, oh, you shouldn't work with your friends or shouldn't work with your family. That's not been my experience. I don't have to be best friends with everyone I work with, but I want to like the people I work with. These are people
yeah,
I spend a lot of time with. These are people I want to feel some level of trust and authenticity with. And I find that by working with people that I respect and admire and that respect and admire me, I always get their best because we respect and admire each other. Like, of
yeah,
course you're going to get my best.
yeah. No, absolutely. Cool. So I'm very conscious about the time. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about your non-MBA
Oh yeah,
as
and
we're
again,
bringing to a close. Yeah.
happy to offer that to your audience. So yeah, I did it kind of as a joke. It started as a joke, but I went to Wharton for my MBA, which at the time I went was the top ranked business school in the world. And people are like, oh wow, you went to Wharton. I'm like, the education was worthless. And I like literally, and so much so that I think it was about 10 months or so ago, I ripped up my Wharton diploma live on a podcast to make the point. And so what I did was I created just like a 4.5, 5 hour course on how to evaluate an idea, start, scale, and sell a business. Basically what I wish they had taught me at Wharton, but didn't. And the reality is it really doesn't take for the basics, it doesn't take more than 5 hours. And so anyone who wants to, I'll give them three months free into my community and they'll be able to get access to the anti-MBA for free. But ultimately, since I was in that hospital bed when I was 24, I swore to myself when I have the opportunity to touch people's life in a positive way, I would, and I stuck to that. So anyone in your audience that I could be helpful to, I'd be happy to be.
Thank you so much indeed. So everyone will put you a link in the show notes so that you can get access to that from Dave. So Dave, thank you so much for your time coming on the show today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your insights on how to scale businesses, but importantly, how to look after your team and to be a great leader for them, it was so important. So thank you so much indeed for that.
Julia, thanks for having me on.
Okay. For all the listeners, I'd really like to challenge you and I'd like to be curious about what are you going to do this week to become more of a servant leader in your organization? And how are you going to carve out time to spend time with your team, getting to know them and what their likes and dislikes are so that they can step up and become more engaged within your team. So until next week, everyone, thank you so much for your time and we shall see you next week. Bye bye.